Good afternoon. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Louisville December 17th meeting. I'm Alice Bridges, President-elect, and it's my privilege to preside today, and you'll love the reason why. President Greg is in Hollywood. He is at the premiere of Star Wars. Surprise. It's really great to be with you today. Cindy Caudill, Vice President and CPA of Harding Szymanski Company, is going to provide our invitation. Of the university's prestigious vocal award and got her bachelor's degree in jazz vocal performance in 2007. Carly is going to be accompanied today by our very own Charlie Kastner, and I appreciate you giving them your full attention as they entertain us with a little holiday tune.
Search, and there were many candidates, but there was only one that was transformational, only one that was truly inspirational, who brought the desire to make a small, relatively speaking, but very, very important historic university take it into the next life for itself, to reborn it, if you will, rebirth it, if you will. And of course, we chose our speaker today. Today's topic is going to be the result of something that many of you have said to the Speakers Committee. This time of year, we like to have some sort of an ecumenical message. We like to have something that takes us back into faith and reminds us of why we joined Rotary, and the privilege that when we were allowed to join Rotary, we were never asked what our faith was. In fact, we weren't asked if we had a faith. What we were asked was, were we people of good character, and did we want to work to make the world a better place? were willing to join in that type of service organization. You see on the flyer that was sent out, you see her bio. I won't go into that. She's extraordinary. Ladies and gentlemen, Tori Murden McClure.
So when I was asked to consider speaking to Rotary, I thought, oh good, I could talk about compassion. No, that's already been done. Oh, well then I could talk about restorative justice. No, that's already been done. We suggest you talk about comparative religion. That's kind of a dangerous topic right now. Like seriously, I just noticed that when you invite male university presidents, they get to stand up here and brag about their schools. I feel like you've invited me to swim through shark-infested water. But that's okay. Spalding University has been doing the heavy lifting in this community for 200 years. We are dedicated to meeting the needs of the times, and I am here for you. So, before I dive into the dangerous water you have laid before me, I want to build myself a life vest by talking about the history of Rotary. My title for the speech today is Peace, Goodwill, and Rotary. Rotary clubs around the world have a long history of promoting peace and goodwill among all people. As I explored the work of Rotary, I came to this strangely pleasing realization that I had unwittingly married into this family. The first time I ever came to speak to this Rotary Club, it was 1997, and I noticed this guy. He was really cute. He was wearing green rubber garden clogs. In 1999, I came back to speak to this group, and you guys thought I was here to give a speech, but I was actually here to ask McClure out on a date. We've been together for 16 years now, and I've come to realize the things I love most about Mac are the very things that make him an exemplary Rotarian. Service above self is at the core of his being. Mac travels all 4 avenues of service, but he is most devoted to service to this community. Mac applies the 4-way test to himself with every decision, and woe to the Rotarian who fails to tell the truth to McClure. Mac loves few things better than comforting the afflicted or afflicting the comfortable. One day I came home from work at Spalding, and Mac was cussing this guy out on the telephone. He was dropping the F-bomb, calling the guy an SOB. I went upstairs, I changed my clothes, I came back down. He was still cussing this guy out. Mac hung up the phone. I said, Mac, who was that? He said, the mayor. Mac thought Mayor Abramson wasn't doing enough to help the refugees of Hurricane Katrina. I saw Mayor Abramson the following week and he asked about Mac. I said, Mayor, I used this word, Mayor, I heard my husband bitching at you last week. The mayor thought for a minute and said, with as much as your husband has done for me, he can bitch at me all he wants. Mac avoids taking credit, he ducks the spotlight. I will admit that I am biased, but my husband does not go to Rotary. My husband embodies Rotary. In preparing for today, I studied a number of books about Rotary. The best documented was Fred Carvin's Paul Harris and the Birth of Rotary. It's just a light 561 pages, not counting the appendices. It would be fair to say that Paul Harris, for those of you who are guests, Paul Harris was the founder of Rotary. Paul Harris had a scrappy childhood. At the age of 3, he bounced between parents and started bouncing between parents and grandparents. He was the kind of teenager who paid no heed to boundaries. He got kicked out of one high school and then he got kicked out of one college. As a young man, he settled in Chicago. The year was 1895. It was the era of robber baron industrialists who made a habit of importing cheap foreign labor. Competition for jobs was fierce and violence was common. With so many people from differing cultures, ethnic backgrounds, and religious traditions, prejudice thrived. It was in this cold-blooded environment that Paul Harris went out of his way to cross cultural and religious divides. He made a habit of eating in a wide range of ethnic restaurants: Indian, Hungarian, Chinese, Greek. One of his favorites was a small Italian place. He visited different sorts of religious institutions: Catholic churches, Protestant churches, Quaker meeting houses, Christian Science reading rooms, temples, mosques, and synagogues. In 1904 or 1905, Paul Harris invited 3 friends to meet with him. The official date for the first meeting of the Rotary Club number 1 is February 23rd, 1905. However, Harry Ruggles, the guy who literally made Rotary sing, printed the club stationery, and he listed the founding date as February 25th, 1904. As I tell students, do not believe everything you think. The basic idea was to invite successful businessmen to join the club, but only one from each sector. To break down barriers, they agreed to greet one another using their first names. The idea was, all things being equal, you would do business with fellow Rotarians. The original plan was to rotate meetings from one member's business to the next. This gave them the idea for the name Rotary. In the early days, meetings were not devoted so much to the 3 H's of modern Rotary, which are health, hunger, and humanity. Instead, they leaned more toward humor, hijinks, and happiness. Early Rotarians tended to split into 2 divergent camps, those who wanted to socialize and have fun, and those who joined Rotary to network and build business associations. By 1907, Paul Harris realized that the club needed to find some higher purpose to bring the membership together. He settled on what he titled civic responsibility. The first large-scale undertaking involved building public restrooms in downtown Chicago. Not glamorous, but necessaries are necessary. Yes, thank you. There's very little humor in this speech, so there's just a little bit. In the very first issue of what would become known as the Rotarian magazine, Paul Harris wrote the following: "If this Rotary of ours is destined to be more than a mere passing thing, it will be because you and I have learned the value of toleration. May we never in time to come depart from the safe course of rational toleration and humane consideration of the convictions of others." During the 1911 Rotary Convention, Benjamin Franklin Collins shared a principle that had been adopted by the Rotary Club of Minneapolis: service, not self. Over time, this morphed into the Rotary maxim, service above self. By then, Rotary had become international. There was even a club in Louisville, Kentucky, Club 45. Then came World War I. I just love this letter home from a gunner from the British military. He said, "On Thursdays, my mind at 1 o'clock is transported to the Bear's Paw, and over my Dixie cup of Army stew, my gastronomic mind dwells on Rotary luncheon. Please send me 3 copies of the Ethics of Rotary. I want to show my companions exactly what the Rotary ideal is. Amidst the devastation of places where the great guns roar, I would almost sell my soul for the company of that table. Our English service, not self, is really a truism of thousands of men out here." Many young soldiers were blinded by exposure to mustard gas. The Rotary Club of London equipped these men with white sticks so they would be more visible to drivers at night. Obviously, this idea rotated around the world with Rotary. After World War I, Great Britain and France colonized Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, India, and Pakistan. Some Rotarians worried about where colonization might lead. In the 1920s, Rotarians responded to the scourge of polio by starting the International Society for Crippled Children, now known as Easter Seals. In February 1924, Paul Harris wrote, "What is Rotary? Very generally speaking, it is the golden rule in action, 7 days a week." Throughout the Great Depression, Rotary tended to the needs of the injured, the sick, and the hungry. But in letter after letter and article after article, Paul Harris called attention to the 6th object of Rotary: peace and goodwill among all people. In a letter dated November 25th, 1933, Paul Harris wrote, "Practically all wars are the result of one-sided propaganda. Years later, perhaps the truth comes out, but the lives lost and property losses cannot be restored. They are beyond recall." On August 1923, 1937, the Nazi Party banned their members from joining or taking part in any Rotary or Rotary Club. Nazis could not be active in a club that welcomed members of different religions or traditions. During World War II, because Rotary clubs made a habit of crossing cultural and religious divides, Spain, Italy, Austria, and Japan put Rotary and Rotarians on their list of subversive activities and subversive people. I congratulate you. About this time, Rotarians began to discuss openly concepts like human rights and human dignity. In July 1940, the issue of Rotarian magazine printed a declaration made by Rotary International. In these catastrophic times, the board feels that it should reemphasize to Rotarians throughout the world that Rotary is based on the ideal of service, that where freedom, truth, justice, the sanctity of the pledged word, and respect for human rights do not exist, Rotary cannot live, nor its ideals prevail. These principles, which are indispensable to Rotary, are vital to the maintenance of international peace and order and human progress. After World War II, Rotarians played both critical and starring roles in drafting the Charter for the United Nations and in founding UNESCO, the United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization. Rotarians are even credited for giving ideas to Eleanor Roosevelt to include in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Rotary has long recognized that words alone are not enough. In 1947, when the violence erupted between Hindus and Muslims in Bombay, members of the Bombay Rotary Club went into the streets as peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. Your work to wipe out polio on the planet is great, but I am most impressed by the record of Rotarians as peacemakers. So with that as my backdrop, I would like to talk about Islamophobia. I know in comparative religion I could talk about Buddhism and Hinduism and all sorts of other things, but I think today the subject should be Islamophobia. I'm a graduate of the Harvard Divinity School, so if I should say anything with which you disagree, just think of me as a victim of my education. There are approximately 1.6 billion Muslims on the planet, representing 22% of the global population. Currently, Christians represent 23% of the global population. We need to learn to live together. When the Irish Republican Army sets up a bomb in Northern Ireland, we do not blame 1.2 billion Catholics. Islamophobia uses the stereotypic tactics of all prejudices. It holds up a group of bad actors and claims that they represent an entire group of people. If you listen to the Islamophobic dialogue of many of our political candidates, and you remove the word Islam or Muslim and insert the word Jew or Christian or black or whatever oppressed group concerns you, it is difficult not to feel troubled. So, I want to talk about Islamophobia, just 3 different elements. The first is the concept that somehow Christianity and Islam are entirely separate religions that have no connection with one another. Is that the truth? Islamic scriptures and Islamic prophets. So, according to Islam, the Suf is the first scripture, and it was revealed to Abraham and then lost. The Torah was revealed to Moses, the Psalms were revealed to David, the Gospels were revealed to Jesus, the Quran was revealed to Muhammad, peace be upon him. Muhammad was asked to which of the prophets he felt closest. He said, Jesus, son of Mary. People think the Quran and the Bible have absolutely no connection to one another. Sorry, some people, I think this table probably knows better. 2/3 of Quranic chapters refer to what Christians call the Bible. Adam, Abraham, Noah, Moses, David, Solomon, Joseph, Jesus are all mentioned dozens of times. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, I already told you that part. Let's keep moving on. I'd like to cover just the 5 pillars of Islam. When you become a Muslim, there are 5 things you have to do. First, you stand up and you make a statement of faith. The statement goes something like this, the most simple version. There is no God but God. Now, some Christians are confused when Muslims say there's no God but Allah. They think that's a different name for God or a different God entirely. Christian Arabs call God Allah. It's just a name for God. There is no God for God, no God but God, and Muhammad was the messenger of God. Now that first statement really gets us into trouble, and it's important for us to recognize please just step back in time with me and trust me that the history is very complicated. But there were Eastern Christians, think of the areas conquered by Alexander the Great, that spoke Greek, the Greek-speaking Christians. And then in Western Europe, the Christians spoke Latin. The original scriptures were printed in Greek, and so the Greek-speaking Christians had some ideas about Jesus, and the Latin-speaking Christians had some ideas about Jesus, and they didn't always agree. In the area around the Middle East, Greek-speaking Christians tended to believe that Jesus was a prophet of God, a son of God, not the only son of God, a son of God. And so it's important to understand that Muhammad was not demoting Jesus by calling Jesus a prophet. It was just what the Christians in that area at that time believed. So they were accepting all the religious beliefs of the folks in that area and just adding on the Quran. There is no God, but God is what Greek Christians said when the Latin Christians came down on crusade. And that got a lot of Greek Christians killed. So, moving on. Other thing you had to do was you have to pray. I don't know that any of us would object to praying. I pray a lot when the Board of Trustees is coming to Spalding. Number 3, you have to practice charity or zakat. Now, Christians tend to think of giving 10% of their annual wealth to charity. For Muslims, it tends to be 2.5% of your annual net worth, not your annual, your net worth. Now, Mac likes that particular figure. He uses it when he's going to visit really wealthy donors. I only want 2.5% of your net worth, Christy Brown. That's a lot of money. The 4th is conducting a fast during Ramadan. Lots of Christians give up things during Lent. The idea is to recognize the bounty each of us has by giving something up, and to have some recognition of those who are hungry, those who are needy, and those we should recognize. It is not out of character with anything in Judeo-Christian traditions. The 5th pillar of Islam is making a pilgrimage to Mecca. Now, lots of Christians make pilgrimages. We don't make them all to the same place. The Canterbury Tales are about a pilgrimage to Canterbury Cathedral. But they would go to particular places to confess their sins and to be absolved. And this happened for Muslims going to Mecca. So let me go to Islamophobia Part 2. There are those who tell us the Quran is an inherently violent text. It is full of hate and cruelty. Is it the truth? Yes, there are 333 passages in the Quran that might be described as violent or cruel. The question we do not hear ourselves asking is, how many violent or cruel passages are there in the Christian Bible? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There are 1,320 passages in the Christian Bible that might be described as violent or cruel. 1,167 of them come from the Hebrew scriptures that the Christians call the Old Testament. The Jewish folks would recognize it as the Torah and following documents. 153 of these passages come from what Christians call the New Testament. So the only way you can argue that Muslims their texts are more violent is to add the Bible and then add the Quran and get yourself to 1600. But I think that's cheating. Now, I don't know that I need these next 2 slides. I was going to talk about honor killings, but I think I'm going to save my time. I wanted to point out that the practice of stoning women comes from the law of Moses, not from the Quran. The Quran just says, 100 lashes for her for adultery, 100 lashes for him for adultery. I really like the Quran is really gender neutral. So let's go to slide 16, Islamophobia Part 3. We have been told that Islam oppresses and subjugates women. Is it the truth? Well, let's just think about female heads of state. The largest predominantly Muslim nation on the planet, Indonesia, has been led by a woman. The second largest predominantly Muslim nation on the planet, Pakistan, has been led by a woman. The third largest predominantly Muslim nation on the planet, Bangladesh, has been led by a woman. The fourth largest, Turkey, has been led by a woman. Women have led in Muslim nations of Kosovo, Kyrgyzstan, sorry, I always messed that one up, and Senegal. Let's think about, next slide. Oh, here we are. No, don't leave that slide, that's important. So the United States ranked 72nd out of about 150 nations for the percentage of women in their national legislatures. We rank behind Afghanistan, behind Iraq, behind Pakistan, and behind Saudi Arabia. Think about women in education. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, advocated for educating both men and women. He said, quote, "The search for knowledge is the duty for every Muslim man and woman," end quote. The lack of education for women and girls in some Muslim nations is more a symptom of poverty than religious principle. One of the regimes most oppressive to women is US-backed Saudi Arabia. I'd like to just spend a moment on the Quran and gender equity. The Quran, as I've already said, is far more gender neutral than either Christian or Jewish texts. Now, some of this has to do with translation. When the Vulgate Bible was the first translation from Greek into Latin, and I'm sure it was completely innocent, but names that were in Greek always female, when they got translated into Latin, became male. Junia became Junius. There are dozens of examples that scholars have followed. So women just kind of got written out. But don't need to labor on that. We can move on. Islamic women, oh wait, and the Quran does not blame Eve for original sin. They blame Adam and Eve equally. Now, I'm a lawyer. I can tell you Eve was framed, but that's a whole different speech. And I don't think she gave it up for an apple either. We want chocolate. Islamic women could divorce, they could control their own monetary assets and own property in the 7th century. In the United States, that didn't really happen until about 1950. It's only about 1,300 years later. Now, I want to just turn our attention, shifting gears, set down the very dangerous topic of Islamophobia, and just talk about the war on terror. I want to count the cost. First, I want to count the cost in human lives. Let's start by thinking about the U.S. deaths. We're Americans, right? We only want to think about the deaths of our citizens. On September 11th, 2001, roughly 3,000 people died. It was a terrible day. The U.S. military estimates that about 6,800 servicemen and women have been killed in the war on terror. I rounded that number up to get to 7,000. U.S. military estimates are that 6,900 military contractors have been killed. I round that up to 7,200. I really couldn't find any reliable statistics on the number of military personnel who fallen victim post-war to drugs, suicide, or trauma. But I really don't want to leave these men and women out. They're important. We need to pay better attention to them, and we need to count them. What I did was I just took the 7,000 that we lost in combat, and I brought that number across. I added the 87 who have been killed in acts of domestic terrorism, including the ones of the previous days. 350 have been killed as a result of terror overseas. That includes all terror around the world, not just terror in the Middle East. And I come to a total of 24,637. I'm just going to call it 25,000 for going forward since 9/11/2001. That's a lot of people. Let's look at the deaths in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. The official U.S. sources estimate that the war has caused between 150,000 and 200,000 deaths in Iraq, between 100 and 150,000 deaths in Afghanistan, between 150,000 and 100,000 deaths in Pakistan, for a total, from U.S. official sources, of between 300,000 and 450,000 people killed. Neutral sources estimate that between 1 and 2 million people have been killed. Less neutral sources estimate that between 2 and 4 million people have been killed. Hostile sources estimate that more than 6 million people have been killed. I want to stick with a neutral source, kind of on the low end. The Doctors for Social Responsibility calculate that 1.3 million people have been killed in the war on terror. Now, I went with this estimate because 1.3 million equals the number of Rotarians on the planet. For every American killed by terror, we have killed 52 people. Most of them were Muslims. I want to put terrorism in context. During the time that the 25,000 U.S. citizens were killed in terroristic acts, 406,496 died on our soil in non-terror related attacks involving firearms. There's a pie chart. 98% of the dead are non-American. I want to talk about September 11th equivalents. In Iraq, our war on terror has caused the equivalent of 333 times the deaths caused on September 11th. In Afghanistan, we've done 73 times September 11th. In Pakistan, 26 times September 11th. The media portrays all American victims as innocent, but compassion requires us to remove ourselves from the center of our world and to place another there. What of their innocent victims? The estimates are that 90% of the casualties in the global war on terror have been non-combatants. If the death toll of 1.3 million in the war on terror is accurate, and even the most neutral sources say that estimates of under 1 million are, I think the word was, exceedingly unlikely. If that death toll is correct, then we have killed 1,170,000 innocent people. Anyway, let's shift to the economic costs. Here's a chart that was done by Forbes magazine. We've spent $1.7 trillion. It's interesting to me that in 2008, when the stock market tanked, when people lost their retirements, we spent $195 billion that year. It's hard for me to wrap my head around what that is. So the next slide I just break down. That is 1,700 billions of dollars. Or stated another way, it's 1,700,000 millions of dollars. So the first president to warn us about the dangers of what has been labeled the military-industrial complex was Dwight David Eisenhower. And I want to let him talk to you about that.
Address of the President. Yep.
A burden of arms, draining the wealth and labor of all people. A wasting of strength that defies the American system or the Soviet system or any system to achieve true abundance and happiness for the people of this earth. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its science, the hopes of its children. The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities. It is 2 electric power plants, each serving a town of 60,000 population. It is 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals. It is some 50 miles of concrete pavement. We pay for a single fighter plane with 500,000 bushels of wheat. We pay for a single destroyer with new homes that could have housed more than 8,000 people. This is, I repeat, the best way of life to be found on the road the world has been taking. This is not a way of life at all, in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron.
So I just want to ask us to consider how many schools, hospitals, homes, and roads would Rotary International have been able to build with $1.7 trillion? My call to action for you is really a simple one. I'm not going to quit my job and try to figure out how to solve problems in the Middle East. And I don't expect anyone in this room to do that either. What I'd like you to do is pay homage to this man right here, Mohammed Babar, who has stepped out very publicly to denounce terrorism. Please step up with him Please stand beside him. Please stand behind him. Literally watch his back and keep him safe. You guys have been fighting the good fight for a very long time. Please do it with Mohammed Babar. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they are the children of God. I want to leave the last words today to Paul Harris. He made this recording at the end of World War II.
Well, Mr. despite the conflict and the hunger and hardship facing many countries today, I'm an incurable optimist in thinking about this old world of ours. My hope for the future is that Rotarians will continue to be ambassadors of goodwill to all races, to persons of all religious faiths, and to members of all political parties. That Rotarians will continue to be purveyors of tolerance, forbearance, helpfulness, kindliness, neighborliness, and friendliness. And that through our worldwide Rotary fellowship, we shall ultimately achieve our goal of international understanding, goodwill, and peace.
So thank you.
Thank you, Tori. It is 1 o'clock, so if you need to leave, please feel free to do so, but we can take time for a couple of questions. I'll just ask you, Tori, give you the floor back for Spalding University to talk about what Spalding is doing to stand up on this issue.
Well, we have Muslim students, and you know, there are always questions that folks ask, and they're not intended to be cruel or mean, they're just naive. And one question would be like, why do you allow Muslim women to wear the hijab, wear headscarves? And I explained, my grandmother always wore a hat to church. I didn't think that hat oppressed my grandmother, right? And she wore a hat to church because that was a symbol of respect. There are passages in the Bible that say women should cover their heads in church. And for folks who are brought up in Islam, they pray 5 times a day. The world, their lives are church. And so I just answer those questions as they come up and do it in a way that says, you know, if you told me I had to go to work in a bikini, I'd be pretty upset. And so let's just honor, there are women who say, oh, that shouldn't be allowed, and men who say that shouldn't. Well, do we not let Jewish men wear the yarmulke? It's a choice, and we should honor that choice.
You made a really fine distinction, I thought, between sort of religious principle and economic poverty. Do you agree with the concept that largely in the Middle East, that because of not only the economic poverty, but sort of the lack of democratic rule, that certain factions of the Islamic faith are warping those 300 plus passages to then use that as sort of as a governing doctrine that is brutally oppressive, but not reflective of sort of the overall.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question. You know, I could also stand a question on crusades or jihad, because I am loaded for bear on those questions. But like so many of the young, mostly men, who are going off to join ISIS, there are amazing numbers of examples of this. They stop before they leave London or France, and they buy 2 books. They buy the Quran for Dummies, and they buy Islam for Dummies. Because these aren't young men leaving because they are leaving out of religious conviction. They're leaving because they feel oppressed and they're looking for a fight. In fact, the French journalists who were captured by ISIS, they said to their captors, could we have a Quran? They didn't have one. And when the call to prayer happened, they didn't leave to go pray. It's not religious conviction. And oh, by the way, about more than 1 million, 1.4 million, I'm told, refugees left Iraq, where the U.S. occupation is going on, and went to Syria. Some of those people are mad at us. And I don't think it has anything to do with faith. And of course, you can find passages. There are two very famous passages in the Quran. They're called the sword passages, something Muhammad Babar could tell you. And they do get twisted, because there are only 3 reasons to go to war. If you're attacked, there are 3 and they have nothing to do with faith. I apologize, I had those wired in, but I sincerely, and the other thing, yes, there are repressive regimes in the Middle East. They're the result of colonization on the part of first the British and the French, now the US. And if you study the history of it, we don't tend to like democratically elected people because they don't stick around very long. We particularly don't like democratically elected women because women usually last a term or 2. They don't last for 20 or 30 years. And if you bought somebody, you want them to stay bought. And so we tend to support dictators who are, we supported Saddam Hussein in his war against Iraq. And so a lot of these folks are folks that we grew. The 3 of the main leaders of ISIS were trained by first the MI5 and then the CIA when they were members of the Republican Guard for Saddam Hussein. And other members have spent time in U.S. jails. So I really think it's a cultural fight, not a religious one.
Tori?
Yes.
George Rennerfield. And I have not got a question. I have a comment, and I think some information that you and others will be very interested in, being you're in education. My first comment would be, if I was Mac, your husband, I'd be laying awake at night saying, how can I keep up with this one? Because, I thought, yeah, she's going to speak, she's a swimmer. I read her resume, and I think God has gotten his money's worth out of you. And what a wonderful accomplishments you have made. I did want to say one thing, and I appreciate you giving us an update on the world around us. I think it's only fitting since you have done so many things around the world. But one thing you had mentioned is veterans, and I am working with the veterans. I am pursuing with their chairman on a possibility of a special children's missed a word here, but anyway, for their children.
Right.
Especially ones with injuries, blindness, leg, 2 legs, lower, that we might put together a special group for their children, as it might relate. We're doing some research with Bill Rotary.
There's some great efforts going on right now that I really want to support. One is the mayor's effort to make sure our veterans are homeless. Because it's very difficult for some of them to reintegrate, and they need help, and the efforts in mental health care, and then the veterans courts, which take into account the trauma, and it's the one area of restorative justice. At Spalding, I'm very keen on restorative justice and starting an academic program in that, but I focus just on children, because I'm giving up on the adults, right? I think there might be a better way for the 12-year-old to kick the bus monitor. I think sending that 12-year-old to jail might be the wrong move. And 70% of the children we send to jail have documented mental health issues, and we train social workers and psychologists. And leaving those children in the realm of lawyers, I am a lawyer, bad idea, right? We need to send them to where they can get some help. And I believe that we should do the same for our veterans, because they have served us, and I do think the best of us, the biggest hearts, the ones, I carried that flag across the Atlantic, I care about that flag, and I want to believe that we're the good guys. and I want us to get our heads up and be the good guys. Thank you.
Thank you.